What if I told you that Bink had a mystery hidden within it all along? A riddle, a prophecy that predicts Joyboy's return within Wano. Stay tuned to the end of this video if you want your mind blown, because today I'm telling you how I cracked Oda's hidden code in Bink. There will be spoilers up to chapter 1043 and you will need to pay close attention as I will be deciphering the lyrics and it will all come together by the end. With all that out the way, let's get straight into the video. So I've seen this idea floating around Twitter, Instagram, and even Reddit, so honestly I have no idea who came up with it first. The main idea goes that there is a verse in Bink that sounds eerily similar to the current events in Wano, especially with the recent Joyboy talk coming from 1043. There's a panel where Luffy is melting and Zunisha tells Momo that Joyboy has returned as Luffy is smiling. I know it might sound crazy to say that Bink foretold this event, but trust me, there is plenty of evidence to back this up. And so let's start off by reading a specific verse from Bink. Flying the proud skull on our flags and our sails. Now comes a storm through the far-off sky. Now the waves are dancing, beat upon the drums. If you lose your nerve, this breath could be your last. But if you just hold on, the morning sun will rise. So first of all, we have the lyrics, flying the proud skull on our flags and on our sails. Bink is a pirate song, Brooke confirmed this, so of course we have a Jolly Roger reference right away. I made an entire video talking about the Roger Kingdom and Jolly Rogers in a past video, and you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with the Onigashima raid? We have a fleet sailing toward Onigashima, and you will see why it matters and why it fits the narrative within the next few lines. The very next line is, now comes a storm through the far-off sky. If you remember during the beginning of the raid, when everything looked grim and Momo got kidnapped, Kanjuro revealed his betrayal, and on top of all this, there was also a vicious storm, wind and rain, and the waves were as wild as ever. In Wano, the sea is completely separate from the outside. It has its own waves and its own currents. We saw this when Nami was navigating into the borders of Wano in the very first episode of the arc, with there being a literal storm during the Onigashima raid and a pirate alliance sailing their flags proudly. These two lines together make for a nice start to cracking the code within Bink. From my perspective, this is the beginning of the raid at Onigashima. Up next, we have a line which completely blew my mind. Now the waves are dancing, beat upon the drums. Once again, this could describe multiple things. I just explained how Wano's waves have a clear contrast to the outside sea. You can see it visually that Wano's waves are powerful and fierce. They have a completely different art style and it's really easy to see this in the anime. So this could be the waves dancing, directly referring to Wano's waves. And so let's get to the good stuff, because I know what you're all thinking about when it comes to the drums. But before we get to that, let's look back when we first saw Wano's waves. We enter Wano with the waves intensifying and a storm crashing. But did you remember that Wano also begins with an octopus jumping on board the Thousand Sunny, and he's slapping his head like if it's a Japanese drum. It has that distinct Japanese drum sound that fits perfectly heading into Wano. So this beat upon the drums line combined with the dancing waves might just describe the journey heading into Wano in the very first chapter. But now with chapter 1043, we have a much different outlook on these lyrics. A new perspective with these drums. During the stormy night of the raid, we have dancing waves, but Zunisha says, I hear the drums of liberation for the first time in 800 years. Joyboy has returned. With the raid in context, we can view the drums in Bink as the drums of liberation and the waves dancing erupting during Joyboy's prophetic return. Many times in prophecies and prophetic returning figures, nature will tend to go wild, almost as if the earth itself could feel the return of Joyboy. If the prophecy was connected to Wano, it may be a situation where Wano was the place that Joyboy was said to return, and that could be why Kaido has decided to rule this country as he is searching for Joyboy. Luffy is the man Oden prophesied who would return according to Yamato. He was able to make these predictions due to his knowledge and learning about the ancient kingdom, the void century, and being so intrinsically connected to Wano. His wife Toki also had great faith that Momo was the moon unaware of the dawn. Momo's parents are characters of prophecy, and let's not forget that Oden himself sang Bink when he was on Roger's crew. With these drums of liberation, sure, it might be Joyboy's heart beating, keeping Luffy on the brink of life, but these drums of liberation may also represent the freedom that will arrive at Wano as soon as Joyboy defeats Kaido. Kaido in this very chapter character says that he will make everyone his slaves, even women and children. So as perfect as Unisha hears these drums of liberation, right after Kaido announced this, he says war means gambling your freedom and hope, so it's fair to contrast this with Joyboy, liberation, freedom, hope. Kaido is a man who defeats his enemies, crushing powerful opponents and stripping away their will, using fear and power to reduce people into hopeless, weak, and compliant people. But what if this is actually intentional? If Kaido was hoping to meet Joyboy, maybe he thought the only way that he could do it was to crush the will of the entire country, therefore forcing Joyboy to show himself and free and liberate the people. It's looking more and more like Joyboy will be a figure who brings hope even during the darkest of times, the small light in the seemingly endless darkness. We have seen Luffy countless times be a great liberator, like in Alabasta, Luffy helping out Vivi, saving our country. In Skypiea, Luffy slams a nail into the golden bell. I couldn't have been the only one who thought the drums might have been connected to the golden bell that weaves history. I also thought that Drum Island could somehow have a connection, but that might just be too much of a reach. But you guys can let me know in the comments, is there a connection between Drum Island, the Drum Kingdom, the drums of liberation? Going back to my main point, Luffy has always been a liberator, even in the recent arcs like Dressrosa, so there is a part of this where Luffy might be the prophesized Joyboy because of his actions being a liberator. And so when Luffy freed everyone from Dressrosa by defeating Doflamingo, this might have been when Kaido first thought, okay, maybe Luffy could be Joyboy. And so now let's move on to the next line in Bink Sake. If you lose your nerve, this breath could be your last. A massive theme in Wano is conquering, it's becoming a king. You have Kaido, Big Mom, Luffy, and even Zoro with his iconic hockey moments, a battle of willpower. I mentioned previously how Kaido intentionally beats down on his opponents with the intention of crushing their will. So with these lyrics stating, if you lose your nerve, this breath could be your last, these lyrics could not fit better in any One Piece arc. Because what this line is really saying is, stay hopeful, stay calm, and don't lose your nerve. Stay ambitious. The mental durability is the key here, and if Kaido crushes your will and you lose your nerve, resulting in you feeding into his villainy and becoming afraid, the battle is lost. Luffy is the one character who is maintaining hope throughout the entire alliance. If Luffy loses his nerve, it could be his very last breath. If Kaido the Conqueror shatters Luffy's will, he would definitely die. And Luffy even claimed during this arc that he had infinite chances as long as he was alive. And so in chapter 1042 and 1043, it seems like Kaido may have possibly killed Luffy, but we all know that Luffy is going to rise up. Even with these destructive attacks from Kaido, his will is still never shattered. Luffy's haki was leaking in Act 1, and even when he got knocked out by Kaido, he was glaring at him, and so where it seems like it might be Luffy's last breath, it's actually the return of Joyboy. And let me tell you, Brook proves that the pirates existed in the ancient past. If Joyboy was a king in the past, he could have been a pirate king of a pirate kingdom, and during these times Joyboy may have sang this song. If Luffy really is Joyboy, it would make sense that Luffy always wanted a musician on his crew. And so now this next line, if you're talking about Joyboy and Luffy, it says, if you hold on, the morning sun will rise. Here we have what could be a reference to a few things. First of all, we have the Toki quote, you are the moon unaware of the dawn. And by the look of things, of how the raid has been going so far, it seems like we are heading more and more towards a finale as the sun is rising. Another way to look at this is by looking through the lens of speculation, the idea that Luffy is Joyboy and he also resembles Sun God Nika, who was a great liberator. If Luffy, Joyboy, and Nika are all the same thing at this point, then this line is even more fitting. They're not even aware of Luffy or the sun or the dawn rising up as he was brought down. I've explained in my previous predictions that I believe Luffy is also Nika because Hyogoro says that Gear 4 resembles the sun god, and there's also the fact that Nika has what looks like a rubbery snake man hair and limbs that bend in an unnatural way. And so this part of the song really seems to fit the description of the current events in Wano on their own. Each line could be something else, but when you combine it, it does tell a story that sounds similar. It seems like it could be a prophecy of what's going on right now with Joyboy. let's move on to a few more lines that may have referenced Wano. In the Viz and Funimation translations, we hear of the Weaver's Town. Bid farewell to Weaver's Town, stay so long to poor renown. The first line is Weaver's Town, a direct reference to Amigasa Village, a straw hat village where Tama and her people created the straw hats until Drake destroyed the village. This is where Luffy ended up, and this is also where Ace came and created a straw hat for oars. And how do you create a straw hat? That's right, by weaving it. So bid farewell to Weaver's Town could be saying goodbye to the straw hat village that was destroyed. Another way to look at this line could be that they're saying goodbye to the mainland of Wano, and so say so long to port renown. That could be the port that we saw in Wano, the port where they met up for the raid, saying goodbye to Wano Kuni as they head towards Onigashima. This song could have been written back in the day where Joyboy was by people who were descendants of Wano. Another possibility is that this is from 800 years ago, so Joyboy leaving Wano and then finally returning as the Dawn 800 years later towards the end of the story and the end of the song. This song was also meant to be lighthearted and sad according to the creator of the music, Kohei Tanaka. There's also another line from the dub where it goes, gather up the crew, wave goodbye, but don't you cry, our memories remain. And this sounds like an inherited will line, but it also reminds me of Odin's journey with Roger, where he wrote that they didn't shed a tear as Roger left the crew disbanded. So another possible reference to Wano Kuni. But if this song is a prophecy to more current events in Onigashima, it might be a situation where a certain tragic event happens soon. Or maybe even after the raid, we will see Momo, Yamato, and other figures staying at Wano and grateful for the Straw Hats as they continue on their journey. If you consider that Thriller Bark is where we first heard of Bink Sake performed by Brook, it might be a possible connection to this theory being true. Thriller Bark is where we first heard of Kaido, and Zoro fights Ryuma there, gets his legendary sword, and this was known as Wano's treasure. Kaido and Gekko Moria had a past history, so maybe Oda always planned for this song to have a connection to the prophecy of Joyboy returning in Wano. Brook also had his soul abilities where he is resurrected, and now we see what looks like Luffy may be coming back from the dead like a zombie. Zombies, Thriller Bark, it's all right there in front of us. Brook is the one guy who sings the song, he sings this prophecy. And so now finally let's talk about Joyboy himself. Big Mom has really given us a huge hint. She claims that the One Piece is in Wano, or at least some of it. If that is the case, then it makes this theory even bigger. Joyboy, a man of joy who is connected to Laugh-Tale, arriving at Wano where some of the One Piece is located. The final lyrics of the song, doesn't matter who you are, one day you'll just be bones. Never ending, never wandering, our funny traveling tale. And guess where all of this is currently happening? That's right, in Wano, a giant skull bone island. So is this skull also connected to the One Piece, to the Bink Sake? In chapter 1043, there is an obsessive focus on Onigashima and its landscape, with multiple panels showing us the island. With the funny traveling tale where the story comes to an end, it does remind me of Laugh-Tale. And this song just fits so perfectly because it doesn't matter who you are, because an Oni who represents a demonic ogre who was discriminated against by celestial dragons or the gods of the world, which is devils versus the gods. And I know it's been said before, but what if Onigashima was the true Joyboy, the original? How poetic that Joyboy's spirit arises within Luffy the night that he is shoved into the Skull Dome by Kaido, fusing their bodies and souls together. And remember that this day is the Day of the Dead, and the place where Kaido, whose name translates to Joyboy, lives, the most iconic skull in the entire series. My final question for you is, why did Kaido change the name of Onigashima? Marco claims that it was something else, but what if Kaido is at Onigashima because the prophecy states that Joyboy will return at Wano? And so he chose Wano for a reason, right? If Joyboy was to one day return, it would be at the place where he died. The giant sword showing Onigashima was a grave. So what if the real name of Onigashima is actually Joyboy Island? Onigashima is the place where the ancient Oni actually died and had his last breath, just like Bink Sake states. We also saw Ace make a straw hat for Oars III, so could this symbolize that Onigashima once wore a straw hat in the past? Onigashima would have been the biggest being, a man so tall that he would be the closest to draw power from the sun. Remember that Kaido Kaido, who is the biggest sake consumer in the entire One Piece world, is a raging alcoholic. He even claims that he's becoming stronger, which I have to say, that is the most alcoholic thing anyone could ever say. Oars in Thriller Bark may have been a connection to Wano, with the name Oars also being the same name as the Nordic sun god. And so Wano could be the legendary land that Oars the Continent Puller had pulled in the past. Is it a coincidence that the Little Oars Jr.'s food is onigiri, a Japanese dish that's in the One Piece world? It would have originated in Wano, the land that is based out of Japan. Onigiri is obviously a play on the word Oni for demon, but there's also Zoro who has ties to Onigiri, these two characters who may have both been distant descendants from Wano, because it's been hinted at that Zoro resembles Ryuma and Ushimaru. Onigashima, the place where Kaido, who is looking for Joyboy and whose name means Joyboy, will finally face off against the one man he has always been waiting for, Luffy, or the true Joyboy. And this is how Binks always foretold us the events in the most important arc in One Piece.